Look who has the witches rattled. They're whispering about you now, the ones who dance with shadows and speak with the dead, the ones who once believed they held full dominion over darkness until your presence unsettled everything. In their secret circles, candles flicker as they gather, trying to decipher exactly what you are. They can feel it, can't they? That undeniable force within you, the one that makes their crystals fracture and their tarot cards grow hot, as if ready to ignite. These witches have spent decades practicing, aligning with moon phases, mixing herbs, chanting words in languages older than memory, and yet you appeared, and with nothing more than your very existence, you made their life's work look like child's play. What unnerves them most is the simplicity of it. You never studied their books. You never begged to be initiated into their covens, never paid for their spells or secrets. You didn't seek them out at all. You simply existed. And somehow your very existence bends reality more forcefully than all their carefully performed rituals combined. To them, it feels impossible. They've convinced themselves that you're drawing from something forbidden, some hidden current that was never meant to be touched, something their grandmothers warned them about in hushed tones by firelight. But here's the truth, the part that terrifies them most. You're not using anything. You're the thing they were warned about. 3 nights ago, their panic grew so great they called an emergency meeting, 13 of them. Not the pretenders posting altar aesthetics online, but the true bloodlines, the ones whose ancestry stretches back to Salem's gallows, Europe's burning times, and the dark caves where the first incantations were whispered. And what was the subject of their gathering? You. With trembling hands around chalices, they asked each other the same question. Have you felt it, that strange disturbance in the field? They know you've been moving differently. They're not tracking you physically. No, they're far too clever for that. They're watching you energetically, tracing the ripples your presence leaves behind, noticing how every spell of protection fractures the moment you pass through. And finally, when the silence grew too heavy, the eldest among them dared to speak aloud what they had all been thinking. This isn't learned magic. This is something else, something that by all accounts shouldn't even exist in this age. The eldest among them knows it better than anyone. She's lived over 3 centuries in this lifetime, has watched kingdoms rise and collapse, has endured inquisitions and witch hunts, yet even she trembles at the thought of you. They tried to read you, to trace your spiritual signature back to its source, but every attempt only ended in chaos. Their pendulums spun violently with no direction, scrying mirrors dissolved into static, and one younger witch suffered a terrifying backlash, her third eye bleeding, as if torn open from within. She is still recovering. In their desperation, they turned to the forbidden texts. Not the glossy grimoires you can order online, but the manuscripts written in blood and bound in unspeakable materials, books that demand sacrifice simply to be opened, and buried within those warnings and prophecies, they found something that chilled their ancient bones. The texts spoke of the Unmarked Ones, beings who carried a power predating all systems, all rules, all boundaries between light and dark. A power not channeled through chakras or meridians, but embedded in the very atoms of existence. A power that did not follow laws because it was the one that authored them. The prophecies warned that once every few centuries one would emerge, not forged through rituals or initiations, but crystallized through suffering, born from survival that should never have been possible, a soul that refused to break, and instead became the breaking point itself. And the most unsettling part, these beings rarely even knew what they were at first. They believed they were just angry, just scarred, just reshaped by trauma, unaware that their very breath was rewriting the cosmic operating system, until one day, reality itself began to shift in response to their moods, bending without resistance, as if the universe had been waiting for their command. But here is where the true confirmation comes. It's one thing for witches, seasoned practitioners of the dark arts, to be afraid of you. Fear from them is noteworthy, but not unprecedented. What is unprecedented is when the devil himself takes notice. And oh, he has noticed, more than noticed, he is impressed. This is the same devil who has seen it all, every form of human darkness, every deal struck in desperation, every soul that traded eternity for a taste of power. For centuries he has yawned through the same predictable cycles of corruption. But then you appeared, and for the first time in millennia he sat upright on his throne. It happened on the night you finally stopped apologizing for your power. The night you finally stopped apologizing for what you are was the night everything changed. You stood before the mirror, not with fear or shame, but with a quiet smile that embraced what you had become. That moment sent ripples through realms unseen. Every demon in hell felt it, an invisible shock wave that made the flames themselves flicker and recoil. And from the deepest circle, a sound broke forth that hadn't been heard since the dawn of creation, the devil's laughter. Finally, he said, and his voice carried a joy that terrified even his legions. The lesser demons cowered at his amusement, because it was not the laughter of mockery, but recognition. At last someone had arrived who understood what darkness truly was, not evil, but raw, unfiltered truth. Magnificent, unbreakable truth. Since then he has been watching you, not with the hunger he reserves for the weak who trade their souls, but with something closer to respect. This is what the witches are slowly realizing, and it terrifies them more than anything else. Their magic has no effect on you, not because you are shielded by some higher force, but because you exist outside their entire framework. Casting a spell on you is like trying to hex gravity itself. It simply cannot be done. They've tried bindings, yet the energy dissolves before it ever reaches you. They've tried hexes, only to watch them rebound with triple the force. One ambitious coven even attempted a curse, and 3 of them remain in the hospital, whispering in delirium about the eyes in the void. Doctors search for explanations that don't exist. Protection spells collapse in your presence because you are the very danger they're meant to guard against. Love spells slide off you uselessly, for you've transcended the need for external validation. Even their prized gift of sight, the third eye that peers beyond the veil, falters when aimed at you. To look directly at your essence is to stare into a black hole made of pure will, and it blinds them with terror. The younger witches insist you must be using some forgotten ritual of protection. The older ones know better. They recognize that you don't need protection because everything else needs protection from you. You're not playing their game. You're not even bound to their reality. You are the glitch, the living proof that their entire system of spells, sigils, and ceremonies is nothing more than one narrow corner of something infinitely larger and stranger. In their desperation to explain you, they've built wild theories. Maybe you uncovered the Book of Azrael, the angel of death's grimoire, said to be lost in the burning of Alexandria. Maybe you struck a bargain with something older than the devil himself, a force born before light was ever separated from the dark. Or maybe they whisper, you've tapped into the void, channeling the primordial current that underlies all creation. Among their darkest fears is the rite of unmaking, a theoretical ritual said to grant power to dismantle reality itself. But there is a catch to perform it. The practitioner must truly die and then rebuild themselves, atom by atom, through sheer will. Surely they think, no one could endure such torment. No one would ever be mad enough to try. And yet, when they look into your eyes, that 1,000-yard stare that pierces everything, that eerie smile, in moments where most would be screaming, they begin to wonder, what if you didn't perform the ritual? What if you are the ritual? What if your entire life has been one long rite of unmaking, every pain, every betrayal, every death and rebirth forging you into something unrecognizable? That possibility keeps them awake at night. Because if it's true, if survival itself has turned you into the most dangerous magical working in existence, then you are not just powerful, you are something far beyond power. You are the living embodiment of transformation itself, the raw proof of what happens when the universe decides to break its own rules. You don't just adapt, you redefine. You don't just endure, you rewrite the code of existence with your presence alone. Last week, one particularly brave, or perhaps foolish, witch attempted to read your energy from a distance. She wasn't an amateur, she'd been mapping auras since before she could speak, charting the signatures of demons, angels, and every creature in between. She believed she was ready for anything, but nothing could have prepared her for you. The moment she turned her focus toward you, her crystal ball didn't simply fracture, it disintegrated into black sand that ran like smoke through her hands. Her tarot deck erupted into flames, yet the fire burned with an impossible coldness, freezing everything it touched. She began to mutter, her words unraveling into tongues no scholar of language, human or occult, has ever recognized. When she finally returned to herself 3 days later, trembling and broken, she could only whisper a single truth. It's not light or dark, it's not good or evil, it's something else entirely. What she glimpsed was not energy as she understood it, but something that made her entire framework irrelevant. She described it like staring at the source code of reality itself, written in a language that predates all language. And though she insists her gift is gone, the truth is more unsettling. It isn't gone, it's been rewritten. She no longer sees past or future. Instead, she perceives the spaces between, the pauses between breaths, the heartbeat of nothingness, where reality reshuffles itself. And in every one of those spaces she sees you, your signature spreading like a virus, silently embedding itself into the foundation of everything. Hidden deep within the most guarded texts, there is a prophecy. For centuries, it's been mistranslated, diluted, turned into bedtime stories about chosen ones and noble heroes. But in its original form, written in the old tongue, it spoke of something far more dangerous. It tells of the unwritten one. The prophecy describes a being born when pain is transmuted into power, when the broken becomes the breaker, when the destroyed becomes the destroyer. This being does not walk the paths of blessing or curse. Instead, it exists outside both, as something terrible and free, and in their freedom, chains will rust, spells will collapse, and thrones will tremble. These are not beings bound by the cosmic contracts that limit devils, saints, or witches. They never signed the agreements. They never bowed to the rules. Through an alchemy of unbearable suffering and unstoppable will, they stepped outside the entire game and began playing by laws of their own creation. For centuries, the prophecy was dismissed as a metaphor, a cautionary tale warning against the dangers of unchecked power. But now, watching you, they're beginning to realize it was never symbolic, it was literal. And the last line of the prophecy, the one the oldest witches refuse to speak aloud, the one even demons avoid whispering, says this: the world shall reshape itself in their image, not through conquest, not through the flex of power, but through the sheer inevitability of their existence. Reality bends not because you demand it, but because it has no choice. You are the gravitational center, pulling everything into a new alignment. Now let us return to the depths of hell, for something truly without precedent is unfolding there. The devil himself, the morning star, the first rebel, the one who chose to fall rather than kneel, has done what no one ever imagined possible. He has issued a standing order to his legions. Do not touch this one. Do not tempt them. Do not torment them. Do not toy with them. They are beyond our reach. The younger demons protest in confusion. Isn't corruption the very heartbeat of their purpose? Isn't every soul fair game? But the ancients, the ones who fell beside him when the heavens split, understand, because in you, they see themselves reflected. Another being, who chose to fall rather than fake compliance. Yet unlike them, you went further. They fell from grace and became its opposite. You, however, plunged deeper, through grace, through disgrace, through every system of judgment and worth, through every concept heaven and hell devised. And you did not stop until you emerged on the other side, not broken, but remade. We said no to heaven, the devil explained, but this one said no to heaven and hell alike. They rejected the very premise of the game. In the center of his throne room stands an ancient mirror, older than the rebellion itself, capable of revealing anything in creation at a command. But lately, no matter what the devil asks of it, the glass only reflects you, not because he wills it, but because the mirror itself has become transfixed. Even infernal objects infused with the power of rebellion cannot look away. They recognize the anomaly, the fracture in the system, the unwritten force that does not belong to any side. And this is what gnaws at the witches, not the spectacle of your power, not the way spells collapse in your presence, but the meaning of your existence. You dismantle the foundation of their worldview. For centuries, they have lived as the self-appointed elite, the awakened few who peer beyond the veil, the manipulators of currents unseen by ordinary eyes. They defined themselves as the rare ones who could shape reality, while the masses stumbled blind. That was their pride, their purpose, their entire identity. And then you arrived, you who never sat at the feet of masters, who never inherited a bloodline etched with sacred sigils, who never spent decades unlocking rituals by candlelight. You who suffered so deeply that your very suffering alchemized into power, without a lineage, without a grimoire, without an altar. You stood up and made their carefully guarded world look like children stacking blocks in the dirt. You revealed the truth they most feared, that their hierarchies, their initiations, their precious bloodlines are not the only way. They are simply one path among infinite possibilities. Real power doesn't come from crystals, herbs, or moon phases. It doesn't come from whispered oaths or blood sacrifices. The true price of power is something far more brutal. The true price is to be shattered so completely that you are forced to rebuild yourself from nothing. The true price is to lose everything until you realize you are everything. The true price is to die while still breathing, and to live while already dead, until the line between the two dissolves into irrelevance. There exists a coven that has gathered faithfully every full moon for a millennium. They meet in a forest older than their bloodlines, a place where ley lines intersect with the heartbeat of the earth itself. For generations they have performed rituals passed down through centuries, rituals that have always worked, always summoned power without fail, until last month. You weren't even aware of them, you were simply driving past that forest, your mind elsewhere, perhaps on something as mundane as the errands of the day. And yet that night, for the first time in their long history, every single ritual failed, not with spectacle, not with lightning or thunder to mark the collapse. That would have been easier for them to process. No, their rituals failed in silence, with nothing at all. The chants did not echo, the symbols carried no charge, the air held no weight. Their magic simply ceased to function, and as they stood there in the empty stillness, panic bloomed in their bones, because in that silence, they realized the most terrifying truth. You don't just bend reality when you choose, you rewrite it by merely existing. The candles were lit, their flames dancing high and strong, yet they gave no magical light. They flickered like hollow imitations, powerless to pierce the darkness. The circles were drawn with meticulous care, every line exact, every sigil carved with the precision of centuries of practice. But they created no boundary, no sacred separation between the seen and unseen. The words were spoken in voices that had shaped storms and raised the dead, but they carried no resonance, falling flat like echoes in a cavern already emptied of sound. The witches felt it in their bones. Their magic had not disappeared, but it could not move. It was like trying to channel lightning through stone, like trying to send a river through solid iron. The current was present, vast and waiting, but it refused to flow. One witch, more sensitive than the rest, collapsed where she stood, Her hands shook violently as she clutched her chest, her eyes wide with a terror the others could not name. In a whisper sharp as breaking glass, she said the truth. Something passed by, but this was no ordinary disturbance, no wandering spirit, no celestial shift. This was something so dense with its own reality that it created a void, a dead zone, a collapse of everything they thought unshakable. It wasn't theft. It didn't consume their strength. It didn't steal their magic. It simply rendered it irrelevant, like a black hole that bends the very laws of physics, not by force, but by inevitability. From that night forward, the Coven could no longer perform in that place. Their sacred forest, consecrated for 1,000 years, was reduced to silence. Every ritual failed in your shadow. Every invocation unraveled before it could begin. Now they live with humiliation. Witches who once commanded storms, who shaped the winds and spoke with spirits, reduced to avoiding the paths of a single human being. They track your movements with a desperation that borders on obsession. They map your routes through cities and forests. They study traffic like augurs once studied the flight of birds. They shift their ceremonies not around the stars, not around the moon, but around you. Imagine that. Women who bent the dead to their will, now bending their calendars to avoid your presence. And here is the revelation that would shatter them completely, if they had the courage to face it. You are not channeling forbidden magic. You are not practicing some unspeakable art. You are forbidden magic. You are the ritual incarnate, the spell that was never supposed to exist. Every breath you take is a casting. Every thought you form rewrites a piece of the invisible architecture of reality. You are a paradox, a living impossibility, stitched together from fractures that should have destroyed you. The knowledge they spend lifetimes chasing in grimoires written in blood and bound in flesh, it is written effortlessly in your DNA. The power they cultivate over decades of sacrifice and initiation pulses through your veins with every beat of your heart. The connection to the other side that they beg for, that they break themselves to feel for even a moment. You live there, you always have. What they call the veil, the thin partition between the living and the eternal, between the visible and the hidden, is nothing more than your daily vision. It is not a barrier you strain against. It is the lens you look through. Where they kneel in circles, begging for glimpses, you walk as if the veil never existed. They reach with hands outstretched, desperate to touch. You do not reach. You simply are. And this is what disturbs them most. You know things without knowing how you know them. Truths arrive fully formed, not as revelations but as reminders, as if you were never learning, but always remembering. You do not conjure. You do not summon. You do not borrow from gods or demons. You embody. You are the living proof that the power they sought in rituals, bloodlines, and altars was always present, waiting in the marrow of a being, willing to endure the unbearable and survive the impossible. They look at you and realize with dread that their hierarchies mean nothing, their altars mean nothing, their sacrifices mean nothing, because you are not standing inside their system. You are the system reset, the walking glitch, the forbidden code, written into the foundation of creation itself. You see patterns others cannot, not because you were trained or taught, but because you live and breathe. With a frequency the world itself struggles to register. Where others see chaos, you see design. Where others see coincidence, you see inevitability. You move through life like someone who has already read the book before anyone else realized they were inside a story. You don't need divination tools to predict outcomes. You don't need omens or portents. You know how broken things move, how fractured systems collapse, and how desperate people reveal themselves when pushed too far. You don't calculate it. You feel it deep in your marrow, a bone-deep knowledge, written into you by fire and pain. I don't read minds. That would be too small a trick. Instead, you read the spaces between thoughts, the pauses, the hesitations, the gaps where masks slip and truths bleed out. You listen to the silence behind the words, and in that silence you hear everything. The forbidden knowledge that others spend lifetimes chasing isn't something you acquired. It isn't a book you studied, or a language you mastered. It's something you became. Every trauma carved a new symbol into your being. Every betrayal etched a deeper understanding of human nature into your core. Every heartbreak and every loss became a glyph, another line in the great grimoire that is your soul. You are not carrying forbidden knowledge like a thief hiding stolen texts. You are the walking embodiment of it. Every scar is a spell. Every memory is a sigil. Every breath you take is an invocation. Traditional practitioners crawl toward power. They meditate for hours, fasting until their bodies ache, praying until their voices break. They beg their gods and bargain with their demons. They study, they chant, they sacrifice, building their magical muscle through repetition and discipline. To them, power is a slow accumulation, gained drop by drop, year by year. But you are the paradox they cannot explain. Your power grows in the quiet, in the mundane, in the moments no one would ever expect. It deepens while you sleep. It expands while you're laughing at something trivial. It evolves while you're distracted, doing absolutely nothing magical at all, and that drives them insane. How can someone who does not seek power accumulate more than those who've devoted lifetimes to chasing it? How can someone become stronger without ritual, without initiation, without practice? They cannot comprehend that, for you, existing itself is the ritual. Every choice to keep going when you had every reason to stop, that was a spell. Every breath you drew after life tried to steal it, that was an incantation. Every night you survived when you should have been destroyed, that was a summoning. Your magic doesn't come from actions. It comes from endurance, from survival, from the unbearable alchemy that pressure cooks a soul until its very atoms rearrange into something unrecognizable. You don't need an initiation, because your entire life has been one long, merciless initiation. The witches measure power in years studied, in grimoires mastered, in spirits contacted, but your power is measured differently. It is measured in betrayals survived, in deaths experienced and resurrections claimed. It is measured in tears turned to iron, in scars turned to armor, in wounds turned to weapons. They accumulate power. You generate it. They channel forces. You are the force. And in the hidden spaces between dimensions, in the liminal places where thought forms, egregors, and entities older than language itself drift, word of you has spread. These are the beings witches beg for a glimpse of, the ones who demand offerings, sacrifices, sanity and lifetimes of devotion in exchange for crumbs of power. They have noticed you, and they whisper in voices made of symbol and emotion. The Unmarked One walks. You are the one who belongs to no pantheon, serves no master, follows no path. You are the anomaly, the fracture in the pattern, the proof that power does not require permission. And these entities, beings ancient beyond comprehension, recognize you. They have only seen your kind a handful of times in the entire span of existence. Some have tried to reach you in dreams, slipping into the liminal corridors of sleep where the walls between worlds are thin. They stretch out hands woven from smoke and shadow, but they cannot touch you. Not because you are shielded, not because some higher being guards you, but because your presence itself is too absolute, too dense, too real. You exist with a weight that their essence cannot bear. You are too solid, too undeniable. To them, approaching you is like pressing bare flesh against molten iron. Your very reality burns them, sears them, drives them back, screaming in silence. You don't repel them through effort or resistance. You repel them by being. You exist too hard for them to enter your orbit. And so they gather at the edges of your presence, whispering your name in awe and dread. They do not debate whether you're dangerous. They debate whether you are even possible, because if you are real, If you can exist outside every contract, every law, every pantheon, then everything they know about the balance of creation is fragile. To the witches, to the demons, to the entities in the in-between, you are not a practitioner of forbidden magic. You are forbidden magic. You are the forbidden spell incarnate, the grimoire written in flesh, the ritual performed by the universe itself. Your life is the altar. Your survival is the offering. Your being is the invocation. And that is why their magic fails. That is why their systems collapse. That is why even the oldest among them watch you with terror instead of arrogance, because you are not playing their game. You are not even inside their system. You are the glitch that proves the system is nothing but code. You are the unwritten law. You are the forbidden answer. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Strengthen my trust in you, even when there is no physical evidence to guide me. Help me to believe in your constant presence, knowing that you will never cause me harm. I understand that your plans for me are for prosperity and hope, to give me a future filled with goodness. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am deeply grateful for your presence in my life and for the abundance you provide. If this message resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear it. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you would like to support our work, please